The F-16, it was an aircraft that if you didn't respect it would kill you, because it's got great ability to pull G's, and not only pull G's, but sustain G's. So you really had to, we spent a lot of time working on building those skills so that you would be prepared. You prepared your body before you went into that turn in order to keep the blood pressure and blood flow up at your brain and your eyes so that you could continue fighting. Mike, thanks for having me here today. It's really important because my wife, she's off in Vegas along with my daughter, and I'm afraid she's probably spending all of my money. So this is taking my mind off of it. I really appreciate that the opportunity we have to talk about a bunch of different stuff that is not about my wife spending money. So,
yeah, that's a good point. The Monte Carlo simulation. That's funny you bring that up. The Monte Carlo simulation. That's the one for all the slot machines. That was created by the Monte Carlo in Vegas.
You know, I don't know why I didn't think of this. You are data mining Mike. I should have had you work with her beforehand so that it's not concerned about losing the money. It's about her going down and doubling our money while she's there. She's actually there for a cheer competition. My daughter, she's 12, and they actually just recently got an invitation to the national competitions, and this is one of their big competitions prior to that, so that they get all tuned up. But yeah, it would have been nice if maybe I had thought about that. So when she's down there, I send her with 2 jobs, not just watching my daughter, but also helping to work on her finances a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah. So what's up? What's new in the world of you?
Well, I tell you what, I'm just working through the cold weather we've got here like you are. It's been well below freezing, and that's been a challenge. Right now, my wife and I, we've got a contracting business, and so some of these jobs, you've got to worry about things freezing up. So we're taking steps just to protect the projects while we're moving forward. My wife and I, if you don't know, we've got a shop that's in the Garland district of Spokane. And then on top of that, she's an interior designer. So we're helping people renovating their projects. And we've got projects going on out in Newman Lake now, one that's up on 5 Mile Prairie. And working through these extreme temperatures is always a little bit of a challenge. So we make sure that not only do we get the job done, but we get it done so that it is within the type of performance that we want and is going to last even in spite of these extreme cold temperatures. So that's what we've got going on right now.
That would suck if pipes froze and broke.
Oh, yeah. That's been one of the challenges. One of the people we're working with, unfortunately, they've got a bunch of water mold issues. In fact, that's what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to be crawling around in a crawl space, taking a look at some of that water damage so that we can get some engineering work done for them and make sure that once we put the house back together and hand it back to them, it's going to be good for another 50 years.
Mm-hmm. That's rewarding work. I like the trades, and every once in a while I help my dad with his cabinet shop. Because I am a master cabinet maker too.
Oh, I didn't know that about you. That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's one of my trades.
I tell you what, we may have to pull you in on the weekends then.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a lucrative one, that's for sure. Yeah, there's no shortage of cabinet work that needs to be done. But it's a lot of fun. I like it. I like getting in and to people's houses and taking the raw material and creating the finished product and setting up, getting everything leveled. We don't put granite countertops on. The countertop does that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we hand off some of that specialty stuff to the other people. You know, that you got to know what your limitations are. But one of the fun things about it, and I, like you, I've got a military background, mm-hmm. So it's always something that's different. It's not a repetitive type of task. Yeah, there's lots of similar tasks, but every situation is a little bit different. And so that when I was in the military, not only was there kind of a purpose to what you were working towards, but also it was always you're always having to learn a new job. Kind of like what you've been mentioned, where we were talking prior to the start of the show, where you're looking at data and finding trends in there for customers for another contractor. You know, it's a really cool idea, and it's not a matter of you may be working with data again, but it's not a matter of doing the exact same thing. It's figuring out what does that data have to do with it. And so the same sort of thing applies in this world too, where it's like, okay, I may know how to put cabinets in, but how do I make it so that the ones we put in make for a great kitchen, a great bathroom that's somebody's going to love for the next 10 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So when are we going to get you in here and we're going to work your project?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like it. I miss that stuff. I don't know my dad flat out refused to do white cabinets. He doesn't do any white cabinets anymore because all the flaws are shown and people get really picky over white for some reason.
Well, I tell you what, I found almost the opposite because people are liking a lot of these dark colors, dark painted colors. So you take a blue or something like that, where as soon as you get a nick in it, then you see the underlying color. And that's difficult for people don't necessarily want to do that because you are going to have the little chips, and those sometimes get hidden a little bit better with the white.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Sometimes they can. Yeah, it really depends on what you want to go for. So what other things have you been got? Well, you know what, let's go back. Talk about your time in the military. Where did you first go to boot camp?
Well, I went through the Air Force Academy. So right out of high school, got on a plane. Actually, it was only the second time I'd ever gotten on a plane, and I headed up to Colorado Springs and spent 4 years there at the Air Force Academy. Graduated there, and that was my boot camp experience. So from there, I moved on to pilot training, and this was at the height of the Cold War drawdown. And I was grateful to have a pilot slot. If I had gone through another program, I would not have had that opportunity because this was the Cold War drawdown. We had all of these people that we were bringing in, all of a sudden realized we didn't need them. And so people who are in ROTC programs and other programs, they were offered the opportunity to go find some other future career. But since the military had spent the money on me to go through the academy, they had put the pilot slots primarily with people who had the qualifications there. And so I went to Columbus, Mississippi, spent a year there. And at the time, because we were drawn down, we had lots more pilots than what we really needed. In fact, they were taking about 2/3 of the classes at the time, and they were giving them what were called banked pilot assignments, where they'd go and they'd be maybe a maintenance officer, or maybe they'd work at a gym or something like that, whatever job they happen to need somebody. And fortunately, I was able to get one of the flying positions that was still the flying slots that was still open. And part of that was because they started, although they had too many fixed wing pilots, they had stopped the helicopter train program. And for about 3 years, they hadn't been producing any brand new helicopter pilots for the Air Force. A lot of people don't even realize that the Air Force has helicopter pilots, but yeah, we've got quite a few doing special operations and rescue and other support type jobs. Anyway, they realized that these fixed wing pilots they were producing at places like Columbus, that they could take them and then retrain them to fly helicopters. My graduating class had the first H-60 helicopter that was doing the rescue mission, and they put that in with the drop, and that seemed like a really interesting job to do, so I went ahead and I volunteered for that. So came out of Columbus, Mississippi with my wings, went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, Mother Rucker if you're an Army person, and did a transition program, and then got qualified and went off to Japan and flew helicopters there for a couple of years. Went to Hurlburt Field in Florida and flew the Blackhawks there in special ops for about 3 years. And then at this point, the Air Force was running a new problem where they didn't have enough fighter pilots. And so they had a program where they were bringing guys from other platforms into fighters. And so I applied for that because my unit was closing. And I was able to get picked up and got to go fly F-16s for a couple of assignments, one in Salt Lake City, where I met my wife, another in Kunsan, South Korea. And coming out of that, I managed to get an exchange position to fly F-18s with the Canadians in the eastern part of Canada. And from there, that's where we spent about 3 years, and from that transition to a couple other things, ultimately ended up leading a squadron in Texas, training new pilots, and retired out of the Air Force in Arizona back in 2015. So that's my military background.
Dang, that's quite a history. That's great.
I've been accused of not being able to hold a job. Most of my friends who were pilots, they're flying for the airlines, doing this, that, or the other, but it just didn't really appeal to me personally. Mm-hmm. I always enjoyed the physical and mental challenges of flying, and although I did fly for about a year initially, I just didn't find the civilian flying to be as rewarding as what I'd found in the military, and so I was okay having other things to do as long as I felt like there was a good purpose to it. So I flew for about a year with it's a contractor to FedEx, these single-engine, small propeller aircraft doing the local routes, and that was interesting too. It was challenging flying here in the winter with the weather, but again, it wasn't quite the level of challenge I needed. Plus, my wife, she had started up her business as an interior designer and was needing people to take care of the projects that she was designing. And so I was starting to get pulled this way and that. And we had to make a decision, and it just made more sense for me to step aside from that completely, put the flying in the past, and I've been managing the projects for her ever since. So that's how I went from being through the military to being now a contractor here in Spokane, Washington.
Dang. Wow. We had a guy on, his name was Ian Crosby. He was an Apache pilot, and he was talking. Well, you know, you were talking, I thought of this problem with Marine Corps aviation, and it's happened 3 times in my personal history of knowledge, where a Cobra and a Huey midair collided. 3 times that's happened. The Marine Corps aviation is only good for one thing: crashing. That's it. And I started thinking about all the serious safety safety investigations, because if anything happens, there's always a safety investigation coming down from headquarters Marine Corps. And there was a time when 2 Chinook helicopters took off out of Hawaii and disappeared, loaded with Marines. Like 60 Marines just gone. It's crazy. I mean, people don't think about how dangerous aviation can be, especially when you take shortcuts. There was this safety, it was OSHA 30. I remember receiving it on base. And there was a big thing that happened in Camp Pendleton. There was this Marine who was working on the flight deck. He was cleaning out the fuel pods for the jets. So he had to get in there into the confined space, and he was cleaning them out. And he must have passed out or something. And he died, and people were looking for him. They're like, where is this guy? He must have went UA. He must have went away, or never came back. And then the jet was flying, and the jet started having issues, and fuel issues. So it pulled in, and they undid everything. They opened the tank, and they see his camis floating in the tank.
Oh, that's a terrible story.
Right?
The Marine Corps is always a different mentality. The Marine Corps aviators, they looked at they weren't concerned if something was leaking. In fact, that just meant it wasn't empty.
Yeah. They say that. They're like, if it's leaking, it's a good thing. When you're getting hydraulic fluid, it smells like transmission oil.
I love Marines. I mean, they kind of take pride in being that we're going to make do and we're going to make it happen no matter what. And so God bless them, because they do a really important job, and that was not a job I wanted to do. I loved what I was doing, but I was glad that the Air Force had a little bit different approach to how it handled maintenance and how it spends its money.
Oh yeah. The Air Force is they aren't cowboyish in their ways. I mean, they can be.
You're talking about aviation accidents, and that's true. It's kind of like a motorcycle accident. There aren't very many minor motorcycle accidents. Just like if you have an aircraft accident, lots of times it's pretty serious, and lots of people get killed. And we saw that there in Washington D.C., where we've got those 2 pilots in the helicopter who ran into a civilian airliner. And I was talking with some people because they were asking me questions based on my background, and it's one of those things too where, unfortunately, it was a serious lapse, and just they were creating a dangerous situation for no reason. And thankfully, it hasn't happened multiple times, but it never should have been allowed to happen in the first place. And it's recognizing what those dangers are, and is it really worth the risk that you're taking for what we're getting out of it. In this case, okay, yeah, maybe you've got that helicopter that can fly along the river around that time frame, but that's also right off of a runway. And doing that at night, if that guy had waited 5 minutes, was that the end of the world? That crew of the Black Hawk? No, and certainly would have saved their lives as well as the total 63 lives that were lost for the accident.
Yeah. But partially how I know that the Bin Laden story's real, that they killed him, is because they crashed a helicopter. That's how you know it's real. That's how I was like, that's real.
Yep. If they mess something up, and then they're willing to talk about it, it's likely that that's going to be there. If you're only going to talk about the glowing stuff, maybe you got to question that.
Mm-hmm. True. Brownouts, man. There was this time, I was not in it. My friend was in it, but a couple people died in it. But the Chinook pilot was going down, and he had a brownout. He was probably maybe 5 feet above the ground, and he did something. And yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things that was always interesting, especially when you're flying at night on night vision goggles, is you start kicking stuff up. And if you had to anticipate what sort of environment you're going to. And if you're thinking you're just going to land straight down, you may be kicking up the dust that keeps you from being able to see to make that last portion of the landing. It only takes a little bit of side motion in order to cause that helicopter to tip over. It's already top heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it starts going, it's tough to stop.
Yeah. And it's just, and casualties at night is 10 times worse than daytime casualties. I living down in San Diego County at the time, it didn't seem like it was uncommon. I know for sure one pilot ejected out, and the plane went into residence.
Oh, are you talking about I saw this on the news the other day where there was a F-18 that crashed into the water there. They had a video of it from a fishing trawler or something. Is that what you're talking about? Or
no, this was much earlier than that. I saw that F-18 drop though. Yeah, okay. But these aviation accidents, they happen. They can be pretty devastating and costly, but people just like, it's the cost of doing business.
When I was flying at Hurlburt Field, I was with Special Operations, and we would work with various teams. And one of the things I thought was interesting about the teams is, the helicopter was a great way to get them to where they needed to be, but really it was probably the most dangerous place for them to be, because once they're out and they're doing their job, there's risk. There may be people who are shooting at them, but they at least can control those. They can plan for those. They're just a passenger on when they're getting transported. And plus, like we talked about, if something goes wrong, it's not just maybe one guy who gets injured or killed. It may be that whole team. And so, a lot of very high percentage that are their losses over time were when they had an aircraft accident. You can think of it back to Mogadishu. Mm-hmm. And when those aircraft were shot down, that had a pretty big impact because they were carrying other crew members. They were carrying team members and things like that. And so that's a pretty dangerous environment. Plus, it's one where they don't really have any ability to affect their own particular environment because they're just along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. True. Makes me think about Vietnam. Man, that's the only way in and out was through helicopter.
Yeah, it's crazy how things have changed over time. You think about from back to World War II and up to now, and the various differences. And in that time frame, we've gone to jet aircraft. We've had helicopters, and all of the advances, and some of it then the weapons advances over time. Like for example, in Vietnam, hey, maybe we had jet aircraft, but they were still dropping the same type of weapons that we were dropping in World War II. And so we'd send a squadron worth of aircraft to attack one target. And so all these guys flying that same sort of profile, they're much more at risk. Plus, you wake up the defenders, they know it's coming. They've got the ability to try and defend themselves, and they're delivering these weapons within the range of people who are shooting at them. And so we end up losing aircraft over that. Whereas now, we've got these weapons where you come on in, it may be one aircraft, and that aircraft may be attacking more than one target. Plus, it makes the attack nobody knows about it until the attack is underway. So the defenders don't really even have the opportunity to shoot back. Kind of like what you saw in the Iraq War, when the stealth aircraft come on in there and the bombs go off and then the shooting starts. So everybody's shooting their guns. Well, the people they're shooting at, they've already left. So these changes over time, it's pretty amazing the types of change that you've seen and where the technology has driven the change and how it affects how we operate in wartime and how we live our everyday lives, as a matter of fact.
True. Yeah. I wonder what the future of the pilot's going to be.
That's a good question. Do you even need the pilot to be in there? You look at what's going on in Ukraine. That's revolutionary, where you've got you've got aircraft, but they're these drones, and they're being controlled by someone who knows how close they are, and maybe they're controlling multiple drones. And you think about that not just for the small drones that are going on and attacking infantry and along the front lines. That could be across the board. God forbid that we ever have a direct confrontation with China, but you could see in the years in the future where, you still have a person who needs to be involved, but where do they need to be, and then what's their role? Are they part of a team of machines that are operating based off of the control of that one individual or a couple of individuals who maybe they're nearby, maybe they're set back, but the human body is kind of the limitation in the aircraft at this point. So the F-16, that can pull 9 Gs, and 9 Gs is pretty cool, but it really, really hurts. In fact, I've still got on my legs, there are locations where you can see the capillaries that over time they're called gzzles, where you can see the capillaries because of the blood force down. It causes some of those capillaries to burst. And so sometimes you can still have that in the skin that's kind of residual. Anyway, so you can pull 9 Gs, but it's really tough to go beyond that because the forces and staying conscious, that's a full-time job at that point. But aerodynamically, you could have, and structurally, you could make an airplane that's going to fly at pull 12 or 15 Gs of force. And if you do that, you're going to outfly the person who's able to fly at 9 Gs. And what's more, if somebody shoots a weapon at you, you've got the ability to evade that, because 12 to 15 Gs, that maybe that's the difference that allows you to get outside of the safe separation distance for that missile that's fired at you if it gets close enough to detonate.
So, that's a good point. So what do you think about unmanned aircraft, the UFOs? What do you think about that?
That's a pretty interesting topic. And we used to joke, or there was this story that I heard in pilot training, how they brought the first half of pilot training was an aircraft called a T-37, but since been retired, and the second half was in T-38s. And once you transitioned over, that was kind of a big difference, big deal, because the T-37 is a much more forgiving aircraft. The T-38 was fast. You really had to be a skilled pilot. It required real care in terms of handling it, because there were some very serious situations you could put yourself in just based off of the aerodynamics of that aircraft. Anyway, there's a story that goes around that they brought these students in that were transitioning from the T-37 to T-38, closed all the doors, had the wing commander there, and told them, okay, you've gotten to this point. We think you're probably going to make it through, so we're going to share some information that we wouldn't share with the general public. And that is that now that you're flying the T-38, you're going to be flying higher, you're going to be flying faster. So we want you to realize you're probably going to start seeing UFOs. We want to talk about the process for how you can report that, things of that nature. And so about half of the class, they didn't say anything. They went through this briefing. They finished off the briefing, let them out, and then just kind of watched what happened. And about half the class said, "I knew it. I always knew it." The other half, like, "No way, I can't believe it. That's real." They were just pulling their leg.
Yeah.
But after about a day or so, they go, okay, yeah, they let him in on the joke. But it was just interesting. And that's kind of what I think is going on now, where you got about half the people who go, yeah, all right, I always knew aliens existed. Now we finally know. And it's really, I'm not sure what to make of it. The people who are seeing them, their stories are consistent. And I don't think that it's unreasonable that there are aliens out there. But why are they only showing themselves to Navy pilots? Or I don't know that the drones that are seen over New Jersey and things like that. I think if if you start looking for something, you're going to see that. So maybe those aren't necessarily true, but I know that there are a lot of other anomalies and airborne aircraft that they can't identify and we don't know what's going on, that seem to be operating outside of the realm of our known physics. And I don't think that it's extreme to think that there might be aliens, but you also wonder if there's an alien technology they've got the ability to travel across the vast distance of space and come visit us. Are they also just coming here and then crashing? And so we've got the Roswell aircraft. That kind of doesn't make a lot of sense either. So you kind of wonder what is true and what's not. I'm sure there's some mix of it. Mm-hmm. And then I also kind of look at it from, I'm a Christian, so my faith is important to me. And I think some people look at that and go, well, it can't be aliens. God created only us. I don't think that that's necessarily true either. I don't think that those sorts of things are incompatible with faith. That in the vastness of space, there's no reason to think that God couldn't also be creating life elsewhere and shepherding that along. And, one of the lines from Jesus actually is, there are many sheep that are not of this pasture. They too shall hear my voice. There'll be one shepherd and one flock. You can interpret that a whole bunch of ways. Maybe that's meaning that you look at so many things in the Bible that they have more than one meaning. Is it possible that maybe he's also telling us that those shepherds aren't necessarily just here on earth, or those flock, they're not just here on earth, that maybe that life is outside of our known existence, and that's also part of God's creation? I don't know. It seems like it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Could be interdimensional. Could be some sort of foreign technology. Could just be hype.
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't know that I buy the foreign technology one as much, because I think if a foreign adversary had that capability, I think that they would be more likely to use it. I mean, they may be, if they do have that ability to fly over our airspace and operate that way, why would they not use that as well in other ways to benefit their own society? And yeah, it might expose it, but if they feel, if they've got that capability and can use it as a weapon, I think that would give them capabilities that would be so significant that it would be hard not to choose to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How much have you been following the Ukraine war?
Off and on.
Yeah.
It's always popping on my news feed, so I'll read about it, and it's interesting to see the things that are going on, being, military veteran and somebody who is involved in combat units. That was always something, like I said, that was kind of the mental challenge of preparing myself for that and seeing what's actually going on and how they're adapting and using the capabilities and technologies that they have to deal with the challenges that they face. That's very interesting to me personally. So. Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure. I study it wholesale. I study how it's morphing. It's almost grotesque to the fact that we are like the ancient Romans going into the gladiator arena to pay to watch people kill each other. Because we're paying for it. We're paying for that war, and I'm watching it, and I'm thinking, man, this is really strange how reductionistic it went from just the death of tanks, trench warfare, the brutality of trench warfare, and just watching these guys on the drone feeds before the drones kill them. Like, they are helpless. Yeah. They don't know what to do. I know. And they don't even know that it's coming. Yeah. It's terrible seeing that, but it is a good reminder, and yeah, we are paying for it, but we are also, I wish we were doing it in a way to get us to an off-ramp so that we could stop that war. And I'm glad to see that it looks like maybe we're moving in that direction now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you'll watch it. You've got that drone footage, and I can think of one in particular where it's this group of Russian soldiers, and it's the middle of winter, and they're standing around a fire, and this drone finds them and drops a small charge that incapacitates a couple, and the rest of them run away. They had no idea that it was going on, and just one moment you're just struggling to stay warm, thinking that you're safe, and have that all stripped away. That's terrible. Mm-hmm. For sure. And I study the foreign fighters from the American side that go there.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, like crazy brave Americans.
I don't know too much about that.
Yeah, so this has been a thing. Generally, they were guys that served in the military that didn't get as much action or deployment, so they go there to seek that thrill. I think that's my opinion. And prior to the Ukrainian war, I watched him doing it with ISIS. You know, they would go. Well, ISIS had no problem recruiting Americans to go and fight for the Islamic State. But on the flip side, you would also see Americans going and helping out the Yardizi people in Iraq and whatnot and fighting against the Islamic State on both sides. So there is that romanticism.
The Ardizis, that was the group that they were stuck up on the mountain. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I've got a funny story. I've got a connection with that. So
cool.
I was deployed to Jordan, and the Jordanians, this was when ISIS, and a lot of times I don't even call them ISIS. I liked what the locals, or the Jordanians, call it Daesh.
Yeah.
And I like that because they didn't want to confer any authority or legitimacy on them as ISIS, but we'll just call them ISIS for now. Anyway, so ISIS is rolling into Iraq. They get to the Yardizi people. You know, they drive them up in the mountains, and we've got this whole resupply effort in order to keep them from starving. And the Jordanians had decided that because they're right next door to Syria, and Syria is where all this is coming from, plus they don't get along with the Syrians, and we would drive past these enormous refugee camps of Syrians who had fled and are in these ridiculously large camps, and they're just almost permanently refugees there because there was no ability for them to go back. Well, anyway, so the Jordanian government decided they were going to get involved and do some support of what was going on in Iraq. But it's interesting to see just some of the dynamics in the Middle East because they flew a C-130 in with some relief supplies for one group of Iraqis, but they only took care of that group because of the religious affiliation. So they went and took care of a Sunni group. The Ardizis, I think, are Shia heritage, and so there was no interest in getting involved in that. But we were looking at deciding whether or not they were going to do that. And once they kind of looked at it, and it was more from a political lens, they're like, well, that's not one we're going to get involved in. But it was nonetheless kind of neat seeing not only the efforts to help those folks who are suffering terribly based on what was going on from ISIS, but also then seeing the dynamics within the region of, all right, who's going to help out and who's not and why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unique to see how in one part of the world you have the Ukrainians and Russians, and that's like almost a proper fight. It's almost like it reminds me of people getting together to play paintball with with the tape and stuff, and that's very monitored and controlled war, though it feels that way. And then down in the Middle East, it's just cutthroat and brutal, and just beheadings and crucifixions and all the things that ISIS and Daesh does. Yeah, it's nuts.
I hadn't heard about crucifixions. I wasn't
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia does it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to their citizens.
I know that they will behead people. I had not heard about crucifixion.
Oh yeah, they'll crucify people like Jesus.
That's new, and I did not know that.
Yeah, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yeah, you can watch videos on it. It's nuts.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Sharia law.
Yeah.
I'm not going to vote for that one.
Yeah, same. I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, man, how crazy would it be if we were in a Sharia law system? Like, what does that take? Like, just one accusation where, I don't know. I wouldn't want that. Yeah. It's a rough life, man. You know, it is rough. Like, women do not have any life there. They're void of everything. Now, one thing I've noticed too, that about the Iraqis to this day that they still maintain is that Saddam mustache.
That's their thing. They're going to hold on to that one.
They aren't going to get rid of that. No, you could tell that. Oh, of all the Arab men, that's an Iraqi because of that shaved face.
I did not know that. I did not spend time on the ground in Iraq. I take it you did?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was there in 2004 in the holy Shiite city of Najaf in
Okay.
the cemetery. So it was a big, major cemetery battle in the. So we had to fight Muqtada al-Sadr and his Mahdi militia of Iranian mercenaries. And they came into the city, they took it over, and I was there with the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. And I was just a mortarman. I was a mortarman, and we didn't even have our mortars. But they're like, no, you're infantry. And so our whole platoon got online in this cemetery along with the battalion, and we just pushed. And it was a rough fight, man. It was a hell of a siege going down into these catacombs, because an Arab cemetery isn't like a normal U.S. cemetery. So they bury their dead in the crouched praying position facing Mecca.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know it either. And the whole place was just strange, because you would have family stacks going up like 15 high of like if one person dies, and then they'd put the next person on top. And then on
So
top
kind of like have some sort of a shelf or something they'd put them on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a one person stack kind of looks like a chair,
Okay.
right? So they're facing towards Mecca and towards the headstone, and then on the back is plaster and then bricks around it. And then they'd stack the next relatives up to about 15 feet. And that was above ground. Below ground, they wouldn't try to stack them. They'd just shove them into little cubby holes on each side.
I kind of envision like the old school catacombs. Do you think about underneath Rome? Was it kind of like that?
No, it was more, I guess, modern and Arabic looking.
Oh, okay.
Pretty tight spaces on each side, and it would go down to different tiers. And the militia were able to move underneath us, and they could pop out at any direction.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was pretty scary. It was a pretty scary experience, and definitely haunted. Firm believer in paranormal stuff, especially there, because we were violating their cemetery bad. I heard a voice in Arabic whisper in my ear.
Oh,
at
wow.
night. Yeah, I'd get scratched, pushed. People would shoot at things in the thermals that wouldn't die or disappear, because you can see
Wow.
the apparition. You'd see something in the thermals. And then the noises out of the catacombs below were pretty frightening.
Wow.
As well at night. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that's,
no worries.
you know, I got to say I'm grateful for all the opportunities that I have. But as close as I ended up having to be to combat was being deployed to Jordan and supporting the fight against ISIS. But I wasn't directly on the front lines. You know, even though I've been involved in a lot of units that were set up for combat, that ended up not being a situation I was placed in. So I'm grateful not only for my opportunities to serve, but it's fortunate for me that I didn't face that type of risk or those traumatic situations. So I am always grateful to people who did do that, and you know they had that type of service that they worked through. So
Well, same. Alan, you left your comfort zone. You had to learn how to fly a plane.
no, that was a lot of fun though. Yeah.
I mean,
By the way, thank you very much for letting me fly fast jets on your behalf. That was
Yeah.
that was appreciated. So
good.
it was interesting when you talked about the Iranians and the Iranian militia, because you look at what's going on in the Middle East and around the world, and you kind of got to identify what is the root cause. If you want to get anywhere, you've got to identify what that problem is, and then if you can figure that core problem, even if you can't solve it entirely, then you focus your efforts on addressing at least a portion of it. And I think that what's been going on these last year and a half really kind of highlights that, where Iran's that bad actor, and they were responsible for killing hundreds and perhaps thousands of Americans based on their efforts while we were in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East. And I think that stability in the Middle East is important for both the United States as well as for the world. And Iran they are fundamentally opposed to that, at least any stability that is for the world order that America is trying to foster. And the things that Israel has done, where they've ended up largely destroying Hamas, they've largely destroyed Hezbollah, The Houthis, they are at least quieted. All of these actors in the region that were causing terrible, terrible outcomes, not only for America and Israelis, but for the region itself and for the world, they've really largely been pushed down and their strength has been depleted. And that's a good thing. And I think that I would hope that we can actually continue on with that, where we can change that Iranian regime so they're not out there fostering all of these bad outcomes in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. I have a unique take on it. My thought is, ever since the spring of... Well, first off, I guess we have to go back to who they are, who the Arabs are, what is the Muslim world. And a lot of them, not all of them, but depends on where you go, you can easily get them to go back to that sort of religious fervor. Okay, so for example, in Saudi Arabia, it's no secret. The kids go to school, they learn 1 + 1 is 2. There's only one God, Allah, Muhammad is his prophet, and death to America. And they truly believe that Jews drink the blood of Muslim children. And it wasn't until I started talking to the Arabs, and the Afghans don't really care, they're in their own world, but the Arab people, that's not uncommon for them to believe that. And you gotta realize that they're living in states with Sharia law, where, for example, there's the police of vice and virtue that go around in some of these countries like Yemen and Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they go and they police the women, like you can't be wearing makeup.
Yeah, Iran.
Yeah, you can't be doing this. That sometimes they'll behead people. I mean, they're kind of like ISIS, but just branded better in a way. And they are the largest, and Iran and Pakistan, the largest state sponsors of terrorism. My thought is after 9/11, our defense plan was to put an octagon or fight cage in Afghanistan and say, hey, if you want to fight us, come here to Afghanistan. So that way all those young men that romanticize war, that they can go down and fight. And it's not hard. It wasn't hard for them, like say some guy in England who he knows the right cleric who's radical enough at the right mosque, and he talks to him. He's like, hey, if you want to go jihad this summer, we'll pay for your college. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, we'll send you down to Iran. You get some training. And if you're not from a first world country, you go to Pakistan and get second class training. And then go across the border into Afghanistan, report to the local Taliban commander, and he'll send you out where they send you out. And that was pretty appealing too, because you had a lot of people Westerners that live in America that want to fight us. Like, well, I won't commit terrorism here. I'll go commit terrorism abroad and get away with it. And they do. And so, yeah, that seemed to be the tempo that I felt, especially when I was in Afghanistan. I didn't understand it until I was there, and I started to see the foreign fighters that came in. The current Taliban that are the government now are the Afghan National Army that we trained. So the Taliban to me is an American brand. It really is. I mean, we spent a lot of time living with them.
Yeah.
And they act like us. They want to be like us. They have their fingers straightened off the trigger. Sign of the infidel. And I have hope for the country of Afghanistan, but the rest of the Arab world, the Muslim world, it's not too hard to get them to want to fight.
It is a whole different culture, and that's one of the things you got to realize, that we look at the world and people take the U.S.-centric type of idea, like, well, they're just like us. No, not necessarily. One of the things that's really interesting in Jordan is you'd go and it's very much tied to families, and not like you and I think about with the nuclear family, the broader, everybody who's got your name, your last name. And So that has a big impact in terms of, how your life is going to be lived, what your opportunities are, and what they're going to do for you. And it really showed through in terms of how they treated others. So within their military, they'd have guys who'd go out and at their various bases, they'd work them for like 14 or 16 hours straight. And it was crazy because people would get to the end of the shift. They're not really useful anymore. They're not doing anything productive. And they'd have beds that they'd have laying around so that they could crash because they were just so tired that they didn't really have any other choice. And then also, when they were off work and they got off of their 16-hour shift, they may have a place where they could go and sleep and prepare food and whatnot, but they didn't actually live there. So they weren't invested in where they were living. They would then travel back when they had their weekend or their 4 or 5 days off to wherever their family was. And that's where they would be. And so there was a whole different approach where it's not like, hey, as an American, I may be living in Spokane right now, but if I pick up and move down to Texas or to the East Coast, I can still be an American and I'm going to get integrated in that community. And I may leave Spokane behind. That's not the case there. You are going to be drawn back to that, and you aren't certainly approaching the world in anywhere near the same sort of view.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's true.
I thought it was really interesting when you said about the Octagon too, because I don't think the invasion of Iraq was necessarily a great decision. I remember at the time, Colin Powell, and I did buy what he said because he was somebody who I gave him a lot of personal credibility based on his background and what I perceived of his intelligence and his demeanor. But ultimately, the reason why we used for invading Iraq was faulty. But the thing that I thought was interesting coming out of that is that, like you said, all these people who they want to attack the U.S. and they want to engage us, well, all right, come on here and let's do it right here in the open, not in the United States. And that's probably one of the things that probably was beneficial. Whether or not it's more beneficial that we didn't stir up, I can't really say. That's difficult. But all these folks who would have perhaps wanted to try and emulate 9/11, well, they couldn't because they were all focused on attacking the United States, whether it was in Afghanistan or in Iraq or wherever else we were deployed. And we were at least fighting that battle on their territory as opposed to ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. And it's a tough one because that's another thing that I've noticed is I think the Arab Spring, okay, I don't know where to stand on this. I think it boils down to compulsory service. All right? Though I think we should do that. I think that everyone should have to serve in some capacity if you're able-bodied, because that's what they do all across the Middle East. Compulsory service. So they all young fighting, all men of military age, they join the military, they learn whatever they learn, and then they get out. Then the Arab Spring happened. Then you have a bunch of young men with military experience with no job. And then, you can't just jump into a T-72 tank and drive it around. It's not user-friendly. You got to go to a school to learn how to operate it. And that's how these people that's how the Islamic State, they're able to organize people real quick and get units moving the tanks, is they had prior service members. Now the foreign fighters that come in that just want to be like the summer warrior, they're sent out. They're just cannon fodder.
Here's a rifle.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll give you ammunition.
Yeah, but the real guys that are running it, there were probably some Egyptian tank battalion that was the remnants of it that are there, or mixed from all over the world.
Here's a counterpoint to that. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the idea of the compulsory service. I like the idea of, stepping up and doing something for your nation, for your country. That's fantastic. But I did see, and I saw this actually even in Western countries, and I did an exchange with the French military while I was at the academy. So that was really great. And we got to go through their jump school. Well,
real cool.
Yeah, one of the things that we were doing is we were there with these are people who are just serving their required military service. And there was just a different way that they treated them because they knew they weren't around for very long. and they knew there was going to be a replacement next year. So the value of that individual was much lower. Whereas you look at the American military, we know that we're recruiting that person, we're training them, and we're keeping them. And we have to convince them to stay because they've got the ability to leave after maybe 4 or 6 years or even 10 years. And there are reasons for trying to keep as many of them, at least the ones who are really excelling. So we've got that skill base. But when you've got the draft, when you've got people who are doing compulsory military service, it's a completely different way of thinking about the value of that person, because that person is going to be replaced by the next group. And you may not invest the time and the money in them in the first place because you know that they may not necessarily stick around because they didn't want to be there in the first place. And that was even a Western country. Mm-hmm. So I can imagine that when you think about all of these other countries in the Middle East or a third world nation that don't have the resources, and people really are expendable. Different mentality in terms of even how you treat the individual. So I don't know that I like the idea of going. I certainly wouldn't recommend going back to that sort of model.
Oh, for sure. Like the FNG in Vietnam, they wouldn't even bother knowing their name until like after a certain amount of time that they've proven the survival.
Yep, and that was true even in peacetime. It didn't have to be in combat. Mm-hmm. And you even see that you were talking about the crew of a T-72 tank or something like that, just in terms of how again, it's a mentality shift of how they think about people and what their value is. And you look at the Soviet model where it was masses and, all right, we're just getting many people out there. And there's a quality associated with having quantity, but that wasn't necessarily true. And you see that with the T-72s and their Soviet tanks, where the way they designed them, so they put up an autoloader in there for their guns so they could have one less crew member. But then the way that they designed that, they didn't take any time to think about, well, how do we protect that crew so that if they're in combat and something does happen to them, hey, maybe we preserve their lives and their expertise so they can live to fight another day. The way that they've got it set up, for example, and this is, you talk about looking at the Ukraine war. This is one of the things I learned from that, where they've got all of the propellant that's actually there inside of the tank turret. And it doesn't take much to just set that stuff off. Mm-hmm. And that's why there are all these Soviet-style tanks where you see the turret that's blown clear off. Well, you think if you've got a force that's blowing a turret off of a tank, think about what's happened to that poor crew that's inside. And even worse than that, it talked about how if it doesn't blow the turret off, and there was a video of this tank that I think was in Syria where it had been hit by something, and rather than exploding, it cooked off. And so there's this torch that's blowing out at the top of the hatch of this tank, 40 feet high, and is burning for about 10 or 15 seconds where all this propellant is being consumed. And you've got to think about that terrible, poor crew. And the fact that the people who designed that tank, well, they wanted to get as many of those tanks out there, but they didn't think at all about what are we doing in order to take care of that person so that not only are they more effective at their role, but when something does inevitably go wrong, that, hey, we can maybe protect them, they can survive, they can live to fight another day. And when you take that type of mentality, that's going to affect the motivation for that individual. And I think that's a big difference between kind of a Western individualist approach versus the collectivist approach that you saw in the former Soviet Unions or you see in a lot of other societies that don't necessarily value the individual. And it's that whole overarching concept weeds its way down to these small details and decisions that people make on how they spend money and how they design something.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's true. And how they view life. I thought that it was unique to see before the Ukraine war, but I was watching the death of tank warfare with with ISIS, and you're watching. Oh, look what our previous generation anti-tank rocketry can do to your tanks. And then you see it. Well, now the military, the Marine Corps does not use the Abrams tank anymore.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Death of the tank. Huh. Done. Yeah. They saw Ukraine and they're like, we're done.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can look that up.
Gosh.
I think the Army, I wouldn't be surprised if the Army's doing that soon enough.
It seems like there's probably still, and we spend a lot of money on military, and that's one of those things. I know there are a lot of people out there that don't like the military, don't like war. Well, that's totally understandable. But the people, when they look at that, they're looking at the wrong metric. They're looking at the wrong measure of value. And the things that are really costly about military spending is, first off, having to fight a war. And especially if you lose it. I mean, think about losing your freedom, losing your society, having a foreign government that is not only, like in the case of Ukraine, has destroyed so much of their country, even though they haven't lost. But you look at the cost, and you think, I'll bet if you asked a Ukrainian, go back 3 or 4 years, if they could go back and every single penny or ruble or whatever monetary unit you want to use, but there isn't anything that they would have withheld if they could have prevented the invasion by Russia. And so that's what I think the metric you need to look at is what's really costly is losing a war. The second most costly thing is having to fight a war. And the third, I think, most costly thing is not having options to do what you need to do in your national interest. And I think that the United States, by and large, even though we spend a lot of money and some of it is not always spent well, I think that the United States taxpayer, we've done a good job where the way we approach things, where we are looking to make sure that it is effective as a weapon system, that it's effective as a team, and that we've, at least when we can, try and do a good job of utilizing it appropriately to achieve national interest. That's not something that's been replicated anywhere else. And that's why we have such an incredible military, is because we've got people who have gone out there, and I'll use the Air Force as an example, where we'll do live fire missile tests. We'll shoot hundreds of these missiles. Okay, these missiles are expensive, but then we know that they fail, or if we know if they work. And if they fail, we can figure out why. So when we are in a combat situation, that missile that we fire, it does what we need it to do and what we expect it to do, rather than we shoot it and like, well, that didn't work. Now what do we do? And you end up with an ineffective military mission where maybe you have people die, you lose resources, you have an extended war. And those are the things that I think is what people need to look at when you're talking about cost and thinking about military preparedness. Is look at it against what's the actual outcome that you're defending against.
All right. Here's a fun hypothetical.
All right.
Though I don't think it would happen in this current time because of Donald Trump. But let's say Joe Biden won, right? What would an invasion look like for the U.S.?
I don't think an invasion of the U.S. would happen. The U.S. military is really strong. There's nobody who's got the ability to project power. I think the danger would be, well, I guess you could, if you want to argue about an invasion, it would be kind of the lower tier type stuff where they're taking advantage of the porous border, getting agents in here who can do random attacks. But it wouldn't be the type of onslaught that the Ukrainians are seeing of a force-on-force invasion of the United States. It's just a long way for anybody to go. Nobody's got the ability to power project like that. And even if they did, we've got military forces that are extremely capable that we could repel and defeat them. So I don't know that I think a U.S. major war looks like us fighting somewhere else. You know, something like the Straits of Taiwan, getting drawn into a Middle Eastern war. If the Ukraine war were to expand, that's how I think the U.S. A major war looks like for the U.S. Not on American soil. And an invasion of America, I think, looks like these radicalized individuals who hate the United States, hate the West, are able to find ways to come in, and then from there, kind of like 9/11, they act from within.
Yeah. What if they could, this is a big fat what if, they took out every major city with a nerve agent?
It'd be a lot of nerve agent.
Yeah, it would be.
I mean, nerve agent's pretty concentrated, and yeah, you can kill a lot of people with a small amount, but the ability to deliver it is not easy. Moving that large amount, because you are talking about large areas, and so I think that would be certainly not every. I think you could attack and I don't think you would have to attack every major city. I think you could attack a major city, and that's what the terrorists attempt to do, is create that fear through a situation. And if you have one attack that's extremely effective, it has a significantly greater effect than the attack itself. For example, the October 7th attack in Israel, it was a horrendous scale of destruction for a country that size. But did it really affect Israel's ability to survive in and of itself? Did it affect their economy? No. But it has affected their economy because it's an unacceptable situation. So the government has got to react to deal with the threat and address it and protect its population. And so if something like that were to happen in the United States, just like with 9/11, did 9/11 really impede our ability to do anything in the world? No. I mean, our economy was still strong. It didn't destroy our economy, but it forced us to take actions that were very expensive. You look at the TSA and what people accept now as flying.
Yeah.
That whole world changed, and we're spending a lot of money on that. And in a way, you could say, okay, the terrorists, without probably having that as their goal, they created that effect that kind of helped to achieve their end goal of limiting our ability to act independently or as we wanted to, because we're busy trying to defend ourselves across the board, which is difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Very efficient. So do you think it's possible that they're spraying us when the planes are going over? No?
No.
I didn't think so. I got a friend who's all about that. I got a couple of them.
I did see a video lately like, oh, I don't know, that Trump's president, you never see contrails. And when I flew helicopters, I didn't think about contrails because you're not up high. Contrails only happen up high where it's cold. And I don't know exactly what the environmental condition is, but I do remember one of my training sorties where I was in Utah, and I was flying the F-16 at the time. And we're running an intercept on another set of aircraft that are simulating the bad guys. And while we were doing that, we're up at high altitude, it's winter, and I noticed that I'm seeing contrails coming from his aircraft, but I'd never, ever seen that before. And so I'm like, well, I don't really know what to tell him. That's interesting. And afterwards, I was talking with the other pilots, and because an F-16, it's not a very big aircraft. And if you're talking about something that's 2 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles away, you can't see it. It's a speck. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of the size of it on your windscreen, you can't see it until, of course, you put a string that you're pulling behind you. And they were laughing like, okay, yep, there they are. They knew what tactic we were running because they could see exactly the contrails that are coming from our aircraft. And at that point, it wasn't an experience. There was a particular comm that I was supposed to tell him, like, hey, let's get out of the con so they can't see us. But yeah, that's just a naturally occurring phenomenon. That's not nerve agent or mind control agents that are being sprayed.
Well, you just enlightened me to a whole nother world of like talked about things. Oh, cool! It didn't dawn on me. Of course, you could look at someone's trails and start to tell their tactics if you know what you're looking at.
Oh yeah. And when I was up in Canada, so that happened on another one of our training missions where we knew that there were contrails, and so did it was a contracted Red Air is what we call them. They were pretending to be the bad guys, and they were flying these Vietnam era vintage A4 aircraft with jammers. And this particular mission, we were kind of working on some electronic countermeasure type of techniques. Well, the A4 doesn't have a radar, so he can't see our aircraft unless it's within visual range. And again, it's difficult to do. Fighter aircraft nose on, which is typically what you're going to see when it's running an intercept on you. You're not going to see it until it's right at the end. So they had positioned themselves so they figured out where the contrails were and got themselves above that and forced us to have to climb up to intercept them through the contrails so they would have the ability to see us. So little things like that. It's about kind of knowing. That's the reason why we train and why you can't do things in a simulator and think that that's going to be enough, because the simulator is not the real world. And if you don't go out there and actually get into the jet or get into the tank or whatever the submarine, whatever your expertise is, or whatever your area, your calling is within the military, if you aren't doing it in the real environment, you aren't really ready when you need it.
What does 9 Gs feel like?
Painful.
Okay, yeah, I would bet. So is that to put it in perspective, is that like 9 of you on top of you?
Yeah. Now it doesn't. That's not as much for when it's me because I'm not a very big guy. But it's one of those things where you're just hanging on to. All you can do is fly the aircraft really. And one of the things you had to do when I did the transition to fighters is with fighter aircraft you got to go to the centrifuge, and that was just brutal. So the centrifuge. That's even harder. Yeah, it's just spinning you around. And the onset of it is even harder is much faster than even an aircraft because that's all its purpose is. It's so it can very quickly increase those Gs and it can sustain it. And so with the F-16, because it was 9G capable aircraft, we had one profile where you had to pull 9Gs for 15 seconds. And you had a control stick to keep the G's on. And part of the reason for that was that if you passed out, and a lot of people did, and they videotaped you, so they could be critiquing you on how good you are doing for your anti-G strain maneuver. But when you're pulling the G's, your face sinks down, your whole body sinks down, and you're just sitting there struggling against the G's to make sure you're maintaining the blood pressure and supply up to your brain and to your eyes so you don't pass out. And the 15-second one was so difficult because you're sitting there and they've got a screen, so you're chasing this pretend enemy aircraft in a kind of a video game, except that you also have the G forces as well. And you start to see the black kind of creep in around your peripheral vision. And it was just this tiny little tunnel vision at the end of the 15 seconds. But that was all I could do to hang on. And then when I got done with the centrifuge, all of us, we're out in this new town, but nobody had any energy. We were just so beat down from the centrifuge that that was the end of the day for us. I just went to bed and I slept for about 12 hours.
Yeah. So what would be this? Then you talked about earlier the G spots or something. Those
gzzles.
Gzzles.
It's like measles, but with a G.
God, it makes me like sometimes I wonder if I have gzzles when I push too hard. Go to the bathroom. Yeah.
I can't. I'm not gonna check you out for that. I'm not qualified in that area.
But so what would be the situation where you would need to go to 9Gs? Like if you're getting chased and you're like, I gotta outrun them.
Well, you're not gonna. G's are when you're turning, because that's changing the direction of the aircraft. So the way that you turn the aircraft, the way the aircraft flies is a lift. Okay, well, if you take that lift and you pull back so you have more lift, well, you can use that to turn your aircraft through space, change your heading. And it's that change in heading and that maneuvering that you use that to either maybe defend yourself or to attack. And so if you've got a missile shot at you, you've got to maneuver to create miss distance if you aren't able to defeat it otherwise. If it's tracking on you and you aren't able to defeat the tracking system, then you need to be able to outmaneuver that missile. And this is what happened in Vietnam. This is when they had the first surface-to-air missiles, SAMs. Mm-hmm. So that SAM is flying about 2 to 3 times the speed of that aircraft, and the G's that it has to do to match your maneuver is significantly more. So although you might, as an aircraft, be pulling 6 or 8 or even 9 G's, if that missile is flying at Mach 2, 3, 4, 5, it may be having to pull 20, 30 G's in order to match that maneuver because it's going so much faster to change its trajectory to continue its intercept. So if you got a missile shot at you, hey, that's one of the things you're going to do, where you're going to use your maneuvering in order to, one, force that missile to continue changing its trajectory, burn down its energy, and hopefully if it continues to track, you do that last-ditch maneuver so that you can create miss distance between you and that missile. Same thing if you've got an enemy that is behind you and is an offensive position, you're going to max perform that aircraft in order to try and get outside of a weapons employment zone, a threat envelope for their weapons. So that's the times when you're going to be when you're going to max perform the aircraft. At least in terms of turn capability. You could also talk about max performing the aircraft in terms of accelerating as fast as possible, and that would be the case if you're trying to run away from somebody. But modern weapons in in aerial warfare have got pretty extensive range, so it's pretty difficult to really separate and run away from a fight at this point, because they know you're already there. If they already know that you're there, they probably have a weapon that can chase you down.
You just taught me something I didn't know. I didn't realize. Because in my mind, I thought G's were the same as Mach 1.
No.
Yeah, okay, so G is the turning.
Yeah.
And so it is very capable. It probably happens a lot then that somebody does too hard of a turn and they pass out.
Oh, yeah. We've got guys,
That's crazy.
the F-16, it was an aircraft that if you didn't respect it would kill you, because it's got great ability to pull G's, and not only pull G's, but sustain G's. So you really we spent a lot of time working on building those skills so that you would be prepared. You prepared your body before you went into that turn in order to keep the blood pressure and blood flow up at your brain and your eyes so that you could continue fighting.
I wonder, is there some sort of decompression sickness?
No, it's not. It's not like that. I mean, it's not a pressure thing. Although you could have, guys who fly at really high altitudes, like the U-2s, get up above 50,000 feet. I want to say the maximum we were allowed to fly was 50,000 feet, because above that you do need to start thinking about those decompression types of effects. And the guys who are flying the U-2s that are, maybe they're 60 or 70,000 feet, they're wearing pressure suits, because they do end up with situations where they get the bends and some sort of a DCS type of situation. But where we were flying, you'd have enough cockpit pressurization, and there wasn't enough of a differential that having to deal with decompression sickness was an issue. But in other types of flying, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. This is really cool. So how fast are you going? At what Mach is the speed of sound? Or when are you breaking that?
So that is temperature dependent. And
Okay.
the colder it is, then there is a temperature impact, but it's atmospheric pressure as well. So down low, the speed of sound it's at a higher indicated airspeed. At altitude, it's at a lower indicated airspeed. Indicated airspeed is how much air molecules essentially you're seeing go past the aircraft, and that's tied with lift and things like that too. So that's why if you're going fast, Mach number wise, you're doing that typically at altitude, because it's not only is there a lot more drag, so it's harder to be going supersonic at low altitude, and that's probably one of the biggest factors. And we did have aircraft that used to go super fast at low altitude. The F-111, I think it was capable of going supersonic at low altitude, but you could go 600, 650 knots down at low altitude and still not be above the Mach, just because the speed of sound was much higher based off of temperature and pressure and things of that nature. Whereas you get up at altitude, and you could be at above the speed of sound, and that your indicated airspeed may only be 300 or 400 knots, and especially you get up to the above 50,000 feet altitude. Can't throw a number at it, but it's that 600 knots would equate to well in excess of Mach 1, maybe Mach 2.
Okay, so what's the fastest anyone's gone?
The fastest, I don't know. The fastest aircraft that anybody know about is, and they still don't tell you. So the SR-71, the Blackbird, I think those aircraft are flying Mach 5 and 6 regularly, and could probably do Mach 7 or 8, so 7 or 8 times the speed of sound if they were really trying to get at it. The fastest I ever went was 1.78.
How does the B-2 bomber compare? What's that capabilities and limitations?
So that's not one that's trying to fly super fast. It's trying to stay hidden, and then it's also then deploying anymore. Trying to deploy weapons at range. It's really a capable aircraft because it's up there at high altitude. So it's got to be an advanced sort of system that's able to identify target, track, and then engage. There's a whole sequence. You got to know that somebody's there, then you got to be able to find them and figure out some sort of a weapon solution to engage it. And so if you break that down anywhere along that chain, then you can survive in that environment. even if there is a threat. And that's what the B-2 does. So they make it so it's difficult to identify it at range. The missile system that may still be able to target and track it, but if they only have a limited amount of time because they're inside of the threat ring or threat range of that weapon system for a short period of time, they may be able to drop their weapons and then escape before they're able to be engaged. So that's one of the reasons why, the United States, we take kind of a technological approach because we've got technology, and then we can kind of limit and control what's that threat. You think back in Vietnam where guys were flying down at low altitude. Well, anybody with a gun has the ability to potentially shoot you. Mm-hmm. It's difficult for them to do it because you're an aircraft and you're a hard target to hit, and maybe you're going super fast, but it still could happen, and it did happen. Mm-hmm. But if you change that, so now you're flying at 10 or 20 or 30,000 feet, well, now you've really limited the types of people who can affect you. So you've got to have a really complicated, really sophisticated system. And now once you've got a sophisticated system, you can start studying that and figure out, how do I break that down? That's what I was talking about in terms of, hey, how do I prevent you from identifying, targeting, tracking, and engaging? Where do I break that chain that you've got to go through? What's the weak link for that? And so that's where our technology gives us the ability to do this, where we can go out there and we can employ safely even against a high threat environment. Or you think about Afghanistan, and we're fighting people who are not technologically savvy. And you saw this in the case of fighting ISIS, where these guys, once they figured out that the United States was targeting them with fighters, they didn't have to, and they probably didn't ever see the aircraft that was targeting them, but they knew that their friends had been blown up, and they knew that if they heard an aircraft, that they needed to run. And so guys would tell me, and this would happen all the time when we started fighting and running missions in Syria, that they'd be up there and they'd hear that F-16 and they'd realize that, and the F-16 pilot had been identifying them and working through a solution to be able to engage them, but they'd see people throw the guns down and just run, because they didn't know if they were being attacked, because they just wouldn't know if they were being attacked. And you kind of think about that, being out in your backyard and you hear an airliner that's flying by. Think about if that capability is overhead and you have no idea, are they monitoring you? Are they tracking you? And are they getting ready to drop a bomb on you? Mm-hmm. That's the type of situation that we create with our capabilities.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. I'm glad we give them that hell, because they give us hell on other stressors. But so in Afghanistan, we always generally had, we called them ISR assets.
Oh, yeah.
So there's this one they had up in the sky. It was called Scan Eagle. Everybody in the area knew it was there, though you couldn't see it because it sounded like a lawnmower up in the sky. And Scan Eagle sucked. I thought its capabilities weren't that good. It was being manned by some guy in Texas, and but it was a psychological thing for the Afghans, because they knew someone was out there. They knew something was up in the air because they could hear it. They were pretty savvy, though. They started to figure out our capabilities and limitations real quick, and mostly exploiting laziness. I mean, it's the biggest thing. Complacency kills, and you can have everything. You can have the best aircraft and equipment and not do that flight check, then bam.
Yeah.
That's it.
I never assume that our enemies are dumb or that are incapable. They may not have the resources. And take the attack on 9/11. I know people were looking for a scapegoat, and then that's something that in retrospect, hey, maybe we should have been looking for that threat and been able to defeat it. But we got complacent, and we are up against capable adversaries where they are able to take time, figure out what is a way to do it, maybe test it to identify what's going to work, what's not, and come up with a plan. And, same thing with the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. Our adversaries are capable. And so if we aren't actively looking to figure out what's the threat to us, who is it who means to do us harm, somebody will.
Yeah, it's a good point. You brought up 9/11 too, because for the longest time, even when I was in the Marines, this is the power of media. Okay, what I'm about to explain. I was big into wood burning.
Okay.
So I got back from Afghanistan. I got this fancy wood burning kit, and I'm wood burning, and I would listen to YouTube documentaries while I'm doing it, just to keep me occupied. And then I started going into the world of 9/11 conspiracies, and watched all these 9/11 conspiracy documentaries, and I started to think that, no, maybe it was an inside job, maybe planes can't do it. And then for years I just kind of believed 9/11 was an inside job, whatever, I don't care, it really doesn't matter to me at this point. And then 9/11 came around, and I watched some 9/11 videos, and I realized how 9/11 happened. They took two big planes and they flew them into the towers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's how it did. Because all the other 9/11, the 9/11 conspiracy things, like, they're really good at just like slowing down and, oh, look how there's a flame that shows up on the reflection of the building before the thing goes in. That means it blew up, right? Yeah, all these things that they say that, if you're not looking objectively at it, if you're just going into a state of hypnosis, you start to believe it.
You know what? I may not buy into those theories, but I'm glad that there are people out there that are questioning things. And that's a great thing. And I think one of the more interesting things that's going on right now is, for example, you got Robert F. Kennedy getting appointed, and some of the things that he's saying and others have been saying for a long time in terms of some of the chronic health type of stuff, and questions about things that we've just assumed are right. I grew up, the food pyramid, that must be how things are. And really, maybe we should have been turning that on its head, that this carbohydrate, sugar heavy diet that we've been ingesting in the modern world, not only in America, but in the West for centuries, that's had a lot of harm. There's a lot of negative impacts, and that is what is behind, the chronic health issues in the United States. And sitting back to actually question some of those assumptions is good, and force people to show the receipts and back their theories. And this is what the scientific method is about. Force people to go through with a disciplined approach to just go, okay, is what we think we know actually true? And if not, what is? And questioning attitude is an appropriate thing. I think it's good for people. Mm-hmm. It's good for humanity. It's good for the United States.
Yeah, I know that Robert Kennedy is on the food issue, which I haven't really looked into his arguments. I'm sure they align with what I've been thinking the whole time, which is, we have a disgusting food culture. And you see it when you go around the world, and then you come back to America, and the Americans are just fat.
Oh, yeah.
Disgustingly fat. And my family's no exception. I got family members. I had one family member ate himself to death, literally. Got so obese he died. That
was always one of the strongest impressions I would have come back to the United States, is just seeing people and what Americans look like relative to the people from wherever I was coming from. Mm-hmm. And the obesity. And I think that a lot of that is being, I don't know that this is necessarily Robert F. Kennedy's specific thing. He's got a lot of different concerns, but his goal, the things that he's trying to highlight is, what's causing that chronic health issue. And one of them that I've heard that I think probably there's a lot of credence to and a lot to consider is are we really eating the right type of diet? Should it really be that food pyramid where we're eating lots and lots of grains, products that when we feed them to cattle, we do that for them to grow fast, to get big, to get fat, so that we can eat them. And we don't have the exact same metabolism, but that same sort of approach, that carbohydrate that creates sugar, it's a fast burn type of energy, and it was much easier for us to produce that in a large scale than it was, for example, proteins. But that may not necessarily be serving us very well. And having the opportunity to step back and think about it and question it, it's really important. Mm-hmm. Even if it does spawn conspiracies that maybe are just a nut job sometimes.
The data shows it on when you look at, like, just trying to go down the breakfast aisle.
Yeah.
You flip over a box and there's like 12 grams of sugar. So that means there's 12 of those little sugar cubes within one serving size. Yeah. Like, that's gross. That's a lot of sugar. It's hard to cut it out. And I've been pretty disciplined about that. I've reducing my sugar intake, and I go to the Whole Foods section of Winco and I buy. I see it because I got a nephew of mine who's getting bigger, and that's concerning. But he's part of it. You see a lot of these kids around here. They're fat, just fat kids, and that's not good.
No, it's not good for them. I mean, it's clearly showing up in the large statistics for society, for American health, and that's one of them. I'm torn over. You talk about the breakfast aisle, and I try and get stuff for my kids because I do a lot of the shopping for our family. And you look at it like, okay, well, I don't want to buy Fruit Loops, but almost all the other choices are just as bad. They've got so much sugar in there, and everything is so heavily sugared, and it is hard. We crave it. It tastes good. It's like a box of Honey Nut Cheerios, and it's so easy to just snag a handful of that because they taste really good, and you're a little bit hungry. Okay, I'll eat that, but it's not good for you.
Mm-hmm. Even to the point, the malls. That's what's sad too. The malls. Nobody walks around. I was at one of the city meetings at the Public Works building. And the people who own the mall were requesting for a reduction in property tax from the city because there's hurting. Like, nobody goes there. Nobody goes to the mall.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that does seem like a really cool place to just drop off teenagers and they can go walk around and hang out. But they don't even want to do that. They don't want to go to the mall. I don't know where this is going to go.
My kids have gone there some, but it's just, hit and miss. And you're right, I don't have any desire to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, but that used to be like the place they would go.
Yeah, when I was growing up, going to the mall was great.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody was there. It was standing room only. And yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff there, but not anymore. And at least then, you're out and walking around as opposed to shopping on Amazon or whatever you're doing. That sedentary lifestyle, looking at a screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I worry about that. Where's that going to lead with our lifestyles? Yeah, but we'll see. I hear people say it's an income issue. I don't believe that per se. I think it's an American issue.
In terms of getting exercise? Or?
Yeah, they'll say, it's people who are overweight and overweight kids. This is reflective of poverty.
I don't think that's true either.
I don't believe it either because they all got EBT. So, I don't believe it. It's an American issue. It goes back to adults that don't want to do anything.
It's a choice.
Also, yeah, like adults that say, I don't want to continue to play sports. You don't do that when you're an adult. Like, no, you should, and you're setting the wrong precedent by not.
Yeah.
Like showing your kids, we do Jack and Jill softball, something that shows that adults are active in life and you don't just give up.
It's that whole idea of, purpose and what should you be doing and what are the guidelines for helping you to live a purposeful and meaningful life. And it's very easy to fall back on this. Hey, I'm going to watch the screen. I'm going to sit on the sofa. I'm going to stay inside where it's air conditioned or heated or whatever I need to do to get it to the perfect temperature that I want and humidity. And not recognizing that just like there's value in doing work, there's value in those other activities that maybe work-like and may be strenuous and might be distasteful right at the time, but they produce value and they produce meaning. And I think that's probably the broader issue in terms of America is people not people having lost a lot of those foundational principles and those concepts of how do I build value and meaning and purpose in my life. And it can be part of it's through work and through sports, and voluntarily choosing to expose yourself to challenges and uncomfortable situations and going outside of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. True. So how active are you with working out?
So I'll admit that that's not one of the things I do well. I'm active because I'm doing stuff for the work. Yeah. So I'll be carrying stuff, lifting stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'll be staying active, but I don't have a specific exercise routine. And actually that's one of the things I am kind of convicting myself of, that I need to figure out a way to do that better. And it doesn't need to be, it's not powerlifting. That's not going to be what works for me, but things that are improving my, core strength and my flexibility, as opposed to, yes, I may get exercise and my heart rate may be up, overdoing some of the things I'm doing, whether it's hauling lumber or maybe demo or whatever, but something that's more focused to, hey, raising my heart rate over a period of time in a deliberate type of fashion, moving my body in a way that is specifically going to work on those core muscles, work on my flexibility. So I'm not going to throw stones too much from my glass house.
Oh, well, you got a great job because you're working and moving. I think though they do wear on you over time. It's still a good job to have, working hard. I kind of don't, I'm going away from the idea, because my grandpa just died recently, but he was like 95. But up until the day he died, he was working his ass off because he had an orchard. Uh-huh. And he, at the age of 93, I remember I was helping him with the cherry harvest in his cherry orchard. And he was there lifting up bins of cherries.
Oh, wow. Where's this at?
In Wenatchee,
Okay,
Washington.
cool.
Yeah. And so we have a family orchard there. Well, now it's off to the winds now since he's dead. But I don't believe, I think that you die when you stop working. And I remember working in the milling section when I was at one cabinet company I started at. I was in the millings. All I did was just pull the boards out of the sander, stack them up all day. My left hand got strong. Yeah. And then I had another job, ironworking.
Oh, okay.
Just after it got cut out of the plasma cutter, we'd knock it out and lift it and stack it. And that was great for my body. I was pretty good shape. Uh-huh. Yeah, I think Americans don't want to sweat. A lot of them don't.
A lot of them don't. But that's why it's nice that some of the trades there's a resurgence there, the interest in that, because for so long and being a school board member, this is one of those things that is a passion of mine, that trying to bring back that trades. I've had a lot of education. A lot of it has been great. Some of it was completely of no value. And it's going to be that for everyone. And not everyone needs to go out and have a university education. We ought to be able to train somebody through our basic education up to 18, where they've got the skills. They step out the door, they can take care of themselves, they can be a good citizen, they can make good rational decisions, make good decisions in terms of, hey, who is telling the truth and who's not. That's always difficult. And school is not necessarily I'll push back to religion being a part of that as well, for making those sorts of determinations. But the fact that I think we're stepping away from the idea that in order to have value in your life and in your job, that you've got to have a college education. That's never been true. And I'm glad that we're stepping away from that, and we're seeing a resurgence of interest in trades, that hands-on, practical type of work where you can see that outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good feeling too, because I build all my own furniture except for couches. I don't know how to build a couch. And it's a great, rewarding feeling. Yeah. That, you see something that's some expensive piece of furniture and say, I could just replicate that myself for a fraction of the price. Or the South Park, they did a recent episode, where all the billionaires are handymen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so the handy, and it's funny because all the characters are like, "Oh, why'd I waste my time going to college? I should have been learning how to do stuff." So that was funny.
One of my favorite guys, so this is a shout out to Brett Grogan, GNS Upholstery. He's a local guy and Harley looking guy, big beard, long hair. Yeah, and he's an upholsterer. You don't think about, you think about an upholstery, somebody who's, you talk about the sofa, reupholstering, putting fabric on to a chair. You don't think about it being that type of guy, but those sorts of skills, and that's stuff that you can't easily replace with AI. That's not something that can necessarily be taken over easily by a robot. And so those sorts of skills are great. And once you have those, the problem solving that goes along with it, it can be so broadly applied. And so those are great skills that I think, even if you do go on and you're going to go to university, having that, so you recognize that it's not, you're not going to solve everything from a phone or an iPad or a PC, that some of it's going to involve actually getting down and dealing with the whatever material you're working on and understanding the problems that are associated with that. That's all part of that core learning that makes you a well-rounded individual.
True. And I think people suffer from this fallacy that, oh, I should be outsourcing this stuff. I shouldn't learn how to do this. I should spend my time doing what I do, and I should hire somebody else who knows how to do that. And I think that's disingenuous to yourself, because then you're always going to be reliant on those people. It's a real good feeling of accomplishment to be able to know I fixed my own plumbing issue.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's certainly, there's pluses and minuses. There are certain times where you could kill yourself if you don't know what you're doing. You could cause a lot of damage. But the other thing too is most things, there's a lot of fairly basic principles on how things operate. And if you figure out a lot of those things, you can kind of identify at least what the problem is, and then you can maybe make that assessment. Is it reasonable for me to try and fix it? And I've had a lot of situations where that basic understanding of maybe how electrical or plumbing or this system or the other kind of works, and just understand how the world works, allowed me to address that situation where I wasn't relying on just shipping it out to somebody else and hand it off to a professional like you talk about, like you mentioned a minute ago.
Yep, that's true. That's true. And it's, so what hobbies do you have? Do you have any collections?
No, I tell you what, my hobbies really are my kids. And
Okay.
so I used to do windsurfing and...
Oh, that sounds cool.
Oh yeah, windsurfing was a lot of fun.
Wow, I want to do that someday.
Yeah, I have occasionally done it, but it's one of those things where I want to try and get I want to be involved with my kids. And so I wasn't able to get them involved in it. So my hobbies are kind of being involved with what my kids are all. And plus we're a small business. And for people who are out there, if you've never run a small business, realize that the endless tasks, it's hard to realize just how many different things until you step into that role need to be done that there's nobody else to do. Kind of like what you were talking about. Some things you may have to subcontract out, but you can't afford to necessarily do that. And so all of these various things and working through the Byzantine regulations that the state of Washington puts out there to try and stay legit, that's a full-time job and more than a full-time job. So unfortunately, our business and standing that up, that's in a lot of ways has become our hobby. And then, I like to be involved with my kids. So I'm the one who gets them off to school in the morning typically. And I do a lot of the cooking and stuff for the family because I do enjoy that. So that's probably one of my hobbies, I'd say, is cooking, because I like good food, and I know that I can do it. I can cook a lot of times as well as what I'm going to go spend a lot more money for if I were to go out and eat.
Mm-hmm. Going out to eat is the number one killer for a lot of families.
Oh yeah,
that and credit card debt.
And that's a good way to get to credit card debt, is going out to eat all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which and that was you mentioned you're on the school board, and I found all that data set of all the Form 700s of people, and one thing I noticed, anecdotally as I was going through, women have more debt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
anecdotally, right? I still gotta like visualize it, the variables, but and clean up some stuff.
What kind of debt?
Oh, credit card, mortgage.
Oh, just across the board?
Yeah, just in general, they have more debt, whether it's home loan or home, car, student. Yeah, just interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's an income aspect to that, and I don't necessarily buy that it's the patriarchy, necessarily, but there are choices that people make in terms of what type of careers are of interest to you, and the barriers to entry, which kind of ties into what you're going to be, your compensation is going to be, and so I could see where, if you're buying the same sort of things that everybody else is, but you're lower income, maybe based on decisions you made, or maybe some of them. There are outside factors there too. I will acknowledge that. Maybe that's kind of a driver, and that kind of goes back to that kind of figuring out what's the root cause and what's reasonable to try and address. And if you can go after that root cause, even if you can't entirely solve it, that's probably your best opportunity to make gains on whatever you're looking to address.
Yeah, that's for sure. So how do you get customers?
So a lot of it for us is through my wife, and she's a really talented designer. And so people will come to her and they love the things that she does based on seeing pictures of our past projects, and then she'll do a design for them. And then lots of times we'll pick up and we'll be the next step in that process where we'll go, hey, listen, you can go and have anyone do this work for you, but if you want to, here's the cost for us to do it. So a lot of our work is based off of what she does, and it's in her brand, and that kind of ties into the store as well. And now that we have the store down in the Garland district, people come in and they see the store is really cool. There's so many neat things in there, and the reason for setting it up was because a lot of the furniture that she sells and represents as a representative for, it's custom made stuff. And so it's expensive, and it's not necessarily something you're going to buy just dropping into a store. And also it's not something you're going to be able to, you're probably comfortable buying unless you have a chance to actually see it firsthand and sit in it and feel it. So having the store was great in that it allows people to see that, but they can also see the style that she brings, and then all the other cool things that she brought in so that the store is accessible, where she's gone out and there's a local candle maker and who created a custom scent for Garland. And so there are these other smaller items that are really, really cool. Shot glasses or whiskey glasses that have got a map of Spokane laser etched onto them.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of local stuff. And so that, I think, is helping to actually draw where people come in, and people can go find us on the website, 509 Design, but there's millions, and the internet's endless. So trying to be that needle in the haystack, that's a difficult challenge. And that's one of the great things about the store, is that now people can see her taste on display through the things that we have there at the store. But ultimately, it's her design style and how she works with customers that brings a lot of the construction side. And then our job then is to make that idea that she's developed jointly with the customer, the reality.
So the store is a sales funnel as well.
It's become that. I mean, we've only had it open for about 6 months.
Good for you guys. That's really bold.
Yeah, it's really cool. We had another location. We had actually bought a building. It used to be the original Monroe Schoolhouse up near Francis and Division. It's a really cool building, and we thought, that'd be a great design studio, and it would have been. We've had the city of Spokane doesn't like businesses, so they make things difficult. And ultimately, we ended up giving up on trying to get that renovated to become the shop. And ultimately, it was a blessing, because Garland is such a cool location.
It is.
Where people are walking up and down the street and they've never seen our store, never heard of us, but they look through the window and they come on in. And the other location we were at, it would never have happened. And that's really been a kind of a perspective change for me as well, because I'll drive around and I'll look at buildings. And it's funny because over the course of my career, how I look at things has changed a lot based on the jobs I do. So I'm going to do a little bit of the weave, kind of like Trump. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. When I was flying helicopters and I was working with special operators, they were interested in, all right, how do I get in this building to do whatever the mission is? So I would look at a building like, how do I how do I assault it with the helicopter? So how do I get the guys into the
yeah.
building? And then when I'm flying fighters, well, how do I blow up that building? How do I do that most effectively? And now I look at a building like, they need to fix that, that, and that. And now that I'm a business owner, I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, it's a really nice building, but people have to go there. So if they don't have a reason to go there specifically, they're not going to go there, and they're never going to be your customer. So you either need to get them there through advertising or through something else. And that's where Garland has been a real blessing for us, is that we have people who are going there for the area, and especially when it's nice to walk around, then they end up happening upon our store.
That is cool. That's a good way to end it. We're up on 3:00 now.
I think that's probably right. I probably need to get going as well. I got to go crawl in a crawl space. So.
Well, perfect. So, last but not least, where can people find you?
Well, so one of the places you can find me is, it depends on how you're trying to find me. I'd love you to find our business, 509 Design. I'd love you to come and find our store. It's Chase and Home by 509 Design. That's in the Garland District. And I really, if you haven't checked out the Garland District, come see it. It's really coming together. There's great things that are happening. There's lots of great shops, and I'd love to have you come and see our shop and visit and send business our way. But I want you to come and take a look at everything that's going on there and help revitalize that whole part of the town. If you're interested in education, I mostly do that on Facebook through Nolan for Mead is the Facebook site, where I'll kind of talk about what's going on in education. And that really hasn't been a topic that we've had, but as a school board member and somebody who wants to make sure that our next generation of Americans has got the skills that they need to thrive within our country and do great things, not only for the United States, but for the world, we got to do that through education. Our education system has been headed the wrong direction. So it's through that. That's one of my other major activities. I guess that's probably one of my other hobbies too, I guess, is the time that I spend on the school board.
Yeah, and that's productive.
Yeah, and then the other place you can find me is on Data Mining Mike. So.
Data Mining Mike, yeah. Well, you heard it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Alan as much as I did. Be sure to check out his links in the video description below. Check out 509 Designs and everything he's got going. Be sure to like, subscribe, and smash that bell for more data-driven updates. Thank you for listening and watching all the way to the end. I'm Data Mining Mike, and have a great day. Goodbye.